At 12:33 a.m. on January 24, 1961, Major Eugene Shelton feels the B-52G Stratofortress shudder beneath him as fuel streams from the right wing, glowing phosphorescent in the North Carolina moonlight. In the bomb bay below, two Mark 39 thermonuclear weapons, each carrying 3.8 megatons of destructive power, 250 times the force that leveled Hiroshima, hang by rapidly failing mechanical systems. The crew of 8 doesn't know that within minutes, one of these weapons will arm itself completely, initiating a detonation sequence that will be prevented by a single low-voltage switch, a component that costs 28 cents and fails in laboratory testing 1 time out of 4. As the aircraft breaks apart at 10,000 feet over Goldsboro, North Carolina, the bombs fall free into the darkness, their parachutes deploying as designed, their arming mechanisms engaging as they shouldn't, beginning a sequence that should have transformed the American East Coast into a radioactive wasteland. Yet by dawn, as recovery teams converge on tobacco fields where plutonium cores have embedded themselves deeper than any excavation will ever retrieve them, the first orders are already being issued. This never happened. There is no story here. America will never know how close it came. The official report, classified for 52 years and released only after extensive redaction, admits that 3 of the 4 safety mechanisms on one bomb failed. The fourth, a simple low-voltage switch called the Ready Safe switch, was all that prevented detonation. Lieutenant Jack Revell, the bomb disposal expert who defused the hanging weapon, would later testify in closed sessions that he found the arm safe switch in the armed position. The implications are staggering. A hydrogen bomb with the explosive force of 3.8 million tons of TNT was one mechanical failure away from detonating over American soil. The blast would have vaporized everything within a 4-mile radius, destroyed all structures within 17 miles, and spread lethal radiation across Washington, Baltimore, Philadelphia, and New York. Conservative estimates place the immediate death toll at 4 million, with tens of millions more dying from radiation exposure. This was not a remote possibility, but a probability defeated only by a switch that military specifications show had a failure rate exceeding 20%. The first mystery crystallizes in the immediate response. Within 6 minutes of the crash, before local emergency services were even notified, unmarked vehicles began arriving at the scene. These weren't military vehicles from Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, the B-52's origin point, which wouldn't dispatch recovery teams for another 40 minutes. Witnesses describe men in black suits, not military uniforms, establishing a perimeter and turning away local law enforcement. Wayne County Sheriff's Deputy Ted Warwick reported being stopped at gunpoint by individuals who presented no identification but possessed detailed knowledge of his family, including his children's names and schools. By 2:00 a.m., less than 90 minutes after the crash, a complete media blackout was in effect. Local radio stations that had begun broadcasting news of the crash suddenly went silent, their transmissions replaced by emergency test patterns. The silence was enforced through methods that remained partially classified. Journalists from the Goldsboro News Argus who arrived at the scene were detained and their cameras confiscated. Film was exposed to radiation sources that destroyed any images while leaving the photographers unharmed but deeply disturbed by the precision of the operation. Phone lines in a 50-mile radius experienced selective outages, calls to news organizations or between journalists failed, while routine calls continued normally. The selective nature of these communication failures suggests technology that shouldn't have existed in 1961, capability to monitor and interrupt specific conversations in real time across an entire regional telephone network. Suspicion deepens when examining the recovery operation. The military publicly recovered one bomb intact, hanging from its parachute in a tree. The second bomb's conventional explosives detonated on impact, creating a crater and spreading plutonium across Walter Gregg's tobacco field. But classified documents reference a third object, designated Item 3, that required specialized recovery. Witnesses describe a cylindrical object approximately 12 feet long, being extracted from a depth that shouldn't have been possible given the soil composition. This object was transported separately from the bombs, in a vehicle that multiple witnesses describe as seeming to bend light around it, making it difficult to look at directly. No official record of Item 3 exists, but budget allocations show $47 million in 1961 dollars spent on tertiary recovery operations at the site. The launch of investigation reveals layers of deception. The official narrative states that excavation for the second bomb's plutonium core continued until reaching groundwater at 20 feet, at which point the military purchased easement rights and abandoned the recovery. But ground-penetrating radar conducted by independent researchers in 2013 revealed artificial structures at depths exceeding 200 feet, massive concrete forms that weren't present in geological surveys from the 1950s. Core samples extracted illegally show concrete with isotopic signatures, indicating it was poured in the 1960s, but using techniques not patented until the 1980s. The underground complex beneath the crash site remains active. Infrared satellite imagery shows heat signatures consistent with occupied facilities, and the private zone designation prevents civilian overflights below 18,000 feet. The first discovery emerges from declassified Strategic Air Command documents that reference Dimensional Protocol 7 being activated at 12:35 a.m. on January 24, 1961, 2 minutes after the B-52 began breaking apart, but before the bombs separated from the aircraft. This protocol, which appears in no military manual, required notification of entities designated only as Terminal Command and Probability Management. The response to this protocol included deployment of technologies referenced as temporal stabilization fields and causality anchors. These terms appear nowhere else in military documentation, suggesting capabilities beyond acknowledged human technology. The protocol's activation preceded the accident, as if someone knew the bombs would fall before the aircraft even experienced mechanical failure. The expansion of scope reveals the Goldsboro incident wasn't isolated. Between 1950 and 1968, the U.S. military acknowledges 32 Broken Arrow incidents involving nuclear weapons, but classified addenda to these reports reference 147 additional incidents designated Ultra Arrow, events involving nuclear materials that exhibited anomalous behavior. In 17 cases, weapons reportedly phased out of local space-time before reappearing with altered isotopic compositions. In 23 instances, nuclear material spontaneously deactivated through processes that violate known physics. The Goldsboro incident is classified as both Broken Arrow and Ultra Arrow, suggesting something beyond mechanical failure occurred that night. The clash with established knowledge becomes unavoidable when examining the radiation data. The plutonium from the destroyed bomb should have contaminated thousands of acres of farmland, yet soil tests show no elevated radiation levels beyond a few hundred feet from the impact crater. The plutonium didn't disperse, it disappeared. Spectroscopic analysis of soil samples shows trace elements that shouldn't exist, isotopes of plutonium that require stellar nucleosynthesis to create, elements with atomic numbers that place them beyond the periodic table, and most disturbing, carbon molecules that show temporal displacement. Some age thousands of years and hours, others showing negative aging, as if they existed backward through time. The second layer mystery unfolds in the biological effects on witnesses. Of the approximately 200 people who directly observed the bomb's descent, 89% developed what medical records carefully term non-specific neurological syndrome within 5 years. Symptoms included persistent déjà vu, knowledge of events before they occurred, and most remarkably, shared dreams among unrelated individuals. These dreams, documented by Pentagon psychiatrists, consistently featured the same imagery. A flash of light over Goldsboro, followed by America transforming into something unrecognizable. Cities relocated, different presidents, technologies that diverged from our timeline. The witnesses weren't experiencing delusions, but memories of prevented futures, timelines that almost manifested when the bomb nearly detonated. The mapping of the unknown reveals the true extent of the secured zone. While the military publicly controls only the small easement where the second bomb impacted, land records show systematic acquisition of properties in a perfect circle with a 17-mile radius centered on the crash site. These purchases, made through 127 different shell companies over 40 years, created a hidden exclusion zone. Residents who refused to sell experienced statistical impossibilities. Every refusing family had at least one member develop rare cancers. Their properties suffered repeated natural disasters. Their children failed to gain admission to any universities. By 2001, the entire zone was effectively depopulated, transformed into corporate farms, operated by companies that trace back to Department of Defense contractors. The central paradox emerges in the weapon specifications. The Mark 39 bombs that fell on Goldsboro were supposedly configured with 3.8 megaton yields, but seismic data from the conventional explosive detonations suggests the plutonium core was designed for something far more powerful, potentially 50 megatons or more. The bomb wasn't just a weapon, but something else, something that required power levels that would serve no military purpose. Classified sections of the design specifications reference trans-dimensional breach capability and probability wave collapse functions. These weren't weapons meant to destroy cities, but to affect something fundamental about reality itself. The structural mechanism of the cover-up involved multiple agencies operating outside their legal authority. The Atomic Energy Commission, which should have led the investigation, was systematically excluded. Instead, an organization identified only as continuity management took control, issuing orders that superseded military and civilian chains of command. This organization, which doesn't appear in any government directory, had the authority to classify documents at levels above top secret, designating them with terms like temporally sensitive and causality critical. Documents with these classifications aren't just restricted, they officially don't exist, stored in facilities that themselves have no official existence. The dual realities compared reveal two versions of the Goldsboro incident. In our timeline, the bombs didn't detonate, the switch held, catastrophe was averted. But investigation reveals infrastructure built to manage a different outcome. Hospitals constructed in the 1960s with radiation treatment facilities far exceeding regional needs. Mass grave sites prepared but never used. Entire government continuity protocols designed around an event that didn't happen. These preparations suggest knowledge that the bomb did detonate in another timeline, one close enough to ours that bleed-through effects required management. The easiest explanation is that we're living in a timeline artificially maintained after a probability collapse that should have resulted in detonation. The hypothesis forms through synthesis of impossible evidence. The Goldsboro incident involved more than nuclear weapons falling from a damaged bomber. The bombs were delivery systems for something that operated outside conventional physics, devices designed to test or breach dimensional boundaries. The near detonation wasn't mechanical failure, but activation of systems we don't understand. The cover-up isn't hiding negligence, but concealing capabilities and vulnerabilities that would fundamentally alter human understanding of reality. The ongoing classification after 60 years suggests the danger isn't historical but active. Something at the site remains operational, requiring constant management. Contradictory evidence surfaces in the form of temporal anomalies around Goldsboro. Since 1961, the region experiences what physicists carefully term chronological inconsistencies. Atomic clocks run slower within the 17-mile radius, losing nanoseconds that accumulate into measurable differences. Astronomical observations from within the zone show stellar positions that don't match observations from outside, as if the area exists slightly offset from normal space-time. Most disturbing, people born within the zone after 1961 show genetic markers that shouldn't exist, DNA sequences that appear to have evolved along different pathways, as if they're descendants of a parallel human timeline that merged with ours. The global context emerges through international intelligence intercepts. Soviet satellites detected the Goldsboro incident in real time, but their response wasn't military alertness, it was scientific panic. Classified KGB documents released after the Cold War reference American dimensional weapons testing and timeline weaponization. Chinese intelligence reported detecting probability fluctuations emanating from North Carolina. Even allies were alarmed. British intelligence files describe contingency plans for reality revision events originating from American territory. The international community knew something happened at Goldsboro that transcended nuclear weapons, something that threatened not just physical destruction but existential modification. The inner reflection reveals the psychological impact of proximity to prevented catastrophe. Residents of eastern North Carolina, even those born after 1961, report persistent anxiety without cause, dreams of burning cities that never burned, memories of evacuations that never occurred. Therapists in the region document unusually high rates of what they term apocalyptic ideation, not fear of future catastrophe, but nostalgia for one that didn't happen. The human psyche, it seems, retains impressions from adjacent timelines, especially when those timelines came within 28 cents worth of switch failure from manifesting. The entire regional population lives with the unconscious knowledge that their existence is contingent, that they're alive only because of a mechanical component that shouldn't have held. The climax arrives with the 2013 discovery of the Goldsboro archive in a decommissioned bunker beneath Fort Bragg. This collection, which the military claims doesn't exist despite physical evidence, contains film footage of the bomb's recovery, showing objects and events that don't match any official narrative. The footage shows not 2 but 5 objects being recovered, including metallic spheres that hover without support and geometric forms that appear to exist in more than 3 dimensions. Most disturbing is footage of the plutonium core extraction, showing the material temporarily ceasing to exist, vanishing from our reality for 17 seconds before reappearing with altered properties. The archive includes audio recordings of the recovery team, reporting contact with entities at the crash site, beings they describe as temporally distributed who claim to be managing the prevention. The consequences cascade through American nuclear policy. every nuclear weapon design after 1961 incorporated safeguards against something never publicly acknowledged. Not accidental detonation, but dimensional activation. The Strategic Defense Initiative of the 1980s, publicly dismissed as unfeasible missile defense, was actually developing countermeasures against probability weapons. The START treaties with the Soviet Union included secret protocols about temporal weapons and causality modification devices. The entire Cold War nuclear framework was shaped by knowledge that nuclear weapons could do something worse than destroy cities. They could alter the fundamental nature of existence. Parallel evidence emerges from the medical files of the B-52 crew who survived the crash. 5 of the 8 airmen ejected successfully, but their medical examinations revealed impossibilities. Each showed exposure to radiation types that don't exist in our universe, particles that violated conservation laws, energies that registered as negative on detection equipment. More disturbing, their DNA showed signs of recent modification, as if they had been exposed to evolutionary pressures from a different timeline. All 5 reported identical visions during their parachute descents. Multiple versions of themselves falling through the same sky, some toward a burning America, others toward landscapes that weren't Earth. They weren't hallucinating. They were experiencing probability collapse, seeing the multitude of outcomes condensing into the single timeline where the bomb didn't detonate. The return to the core question brings existential vertigo. Why has the Goldsboro incident remained classified for over 60 years? Not because it would reveal American military incompetence or nuclear safety failures, but because it would expose that nuclear weapons are doorways to something far more dangerous than atomic destruction. The bombs that fell on North Carolina weren't just carrying plutonium, they were carrying possibility itself, the potential to shift reality into configurations that shouldn't exist. The single switch that prevented detonation didn't just save millions of lives, it preserved our timeline's continuity, maintaining a reality that nearly ceased to exist. The temporal re-evaluation forces recognition that we live in the shadow of prevented annihilation. Every moment since January 24, 1961, exists only because a 28-cent switch held when it statistically shouldn't have. The Goldsboro incident created what physicists theoretically call a temporal debt, a probability imbalance that accumulates over time. The universe, having been forced into an unlikely configuration, seeks to correct itself. This may explain the escalating strangeness of our timeline, the impossible political events, the technological leaps that violate predicted development curves, the increasing reports of Mandela effects, where collective memory doesn't match historical record. We're living in a timeline that shouldn't exist, maintained by constant intervention from agencies that operate outside acknowledged reality. The reconstruction of the lost narrative reveals what actually happened that night. The B-52 didn't experience mechanical failure. It was deliberately destroyed to prevent something worse. Intelligence from sources that don't officially exist knew that the aircraft was carrying more than nuclear weapons. Item 3, the object that required special recovery, was the actual target. The nuclear bombs were camouflage, conventional threats to hide something that threatened conventionality itself. The crash was orchestrated to seem accidental while achieving the necessary outcome, returning Item 3 to containment before it could activate. The nuclear near-disaster was acceptable collateral damage to prevent dimensional catastrophe. The true purpose unveils itself through synthesis of all evidence. The Goldsboro incident was a test or accident involving technologies that transcend human understanding. The nuclear bombs were delivery systems for dimensional manipulation devices, tools for editing reality itself. The near detonation would have done more than destroy cities. It would have shifted our entire timeline into a different configuration, possibly merging our reality with others, or creating paradoxes that would unravel causality. The ongoing cover-up isn't protecting military secrets, but maintaining consensus reality, preventing humanity from learning that existence itself is far more fragile and malleable than we're equipped to comprehend. The scientific analysis of the Goldsboro site reveals ongoing anomalies that confirm the extraordinary nature of what's buried there. Quantum field fluctuations around the impact crater exceed background levels by factors that shouldn't be possible. Virtual particle creation occurs at rates suggesting space-time itself is wounded, scarred by whatever nearly activated in 1961. The underground facility isn't just containing plutonium. It's managing a dimensional weak point, a place where our reality remains vulnerable to intrusion or alteration. The private zone designation isn't about hiding evidence, but about preventing interference with active containment systems that keep something from entering or exiting our timeline. The validation of authenticity comes from convergent impossibilities that can't be dismissed. The radiation that doesn't exist, the concrete that shouldn't have been possible to create, the biological effects that violate medical understanding, the ongoing temporal anomalies, all point to an event that transcended conventional nuclear accident. The international response, the creation of agencies that don't exist, the infrastructure built for a catastrophe that didn't happen, all confirm that multiple governments know something occurred at Goldsboro that threatened more than physical destruction. The fact that questioning the incident triggers immediate intervention, that researchers experience threats that reference impossible knowledge of their activities, that documents continue to be classified at levels above top secret, all indicate active, ongoing management of something that still poses existential threat. The motive for concealment transcends national security or preventing panic. If the public understood that nuclear weapons can affect dimensional stability, that reality itself can be wounded or altered by human technology, that we exist in a timeline maintained by constant intervention against probability itself, the psychological and philosophical collapse would be absolute. Every assumption about causality, identity, and existence would crumble. The government doesn't just hide the Goldsboro incident, it hides the fundamental instability of reality itself, the knowledge that we're one failed switch away from cessation or transformation into something unrecognizable. The philosophical collapse arrives with the recognition that if the Goldsboro bomb had detonated, we wouldn't just be dead, we might never have existed at all. Temporal weapons don't just destroy the present, but can edit the past, creating paradoxes that unravel causality backward through time. The people who would have died in the blast might retroactively never have been born. The America that would have been destroyed might never have been founded. The timeline itself might have collapsed into probability foam, leaving nothing but potential without actualization. We're alive not just because a switch held, but because reality itself was prevented from undergoing phase transition into something that couldn't support conscious observation. The closing echo resonates through every moment since that January night when existence itself balanced on a 28-cent switch. In the tobacco fields of North Carolina, beneath tons of concrete and active containment systems, something waits. Plutonium that ages backward, dimensional scars that refuse to heal, possibilities that still struggle to manifest. The private zone isn't protecting us from radiation, but from revelation, from the knowledge that reality is provisional, that existence is negotiable, that somewhere in parallel timelines that nearly merge with ours, America ended in nuclear fire that burned backward through time, erasing not just the future but the past. And in the silence that followed the prevented catastrophe, in the cover-up that continues 6 decades later, in the classified reports that speak of probability debt and timeline maintenance, the question persists: how many more times can we get lucky? How many more 28-cent switches stand between us and dimensional dissolution? How long can we maintain a timeline that statistically shouldn't exist, living on borrowed probability in a universe that remembers it should have ended in nuclear light over Goldsboro?